the phenomenon of being does not require Brian Zahnd, but I got an invitation anyway. And despite I know this journey through this life is toward another birth, and this journey is going to be painful, and there's going to be moments of great sorrow and loss and all of that. I acknowledge all of that, but I don't want to ever lose my gratitude that I got an invitation to the party.
Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. We long to see the body of Christ look like Jesus. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. You know, we're haunted by something we can't really name, right? There's a restlessness underneath modern life. We could feel it, right? We don't have the language for it. It's the sense that the world has been handed to us. It's smaller than it actually is. I think Brian Zahnd does have the language for it. In his new book, Unseen Existences, he argues that the restlessness is theological, that we've been formed by a culture of materialism that has quietly convinced us the spiritual world isn't real. And that loss has left us homeless. We were born, as he puts it, a long way from home, and we've forgotten we're on a pilgrimage towards it. In this conversation, we talk about why modern Western people suffer a kind of spiritual homelessness, why an earthy faith and a transcendent faith are not actually in tension, how the Incarnation opens us to mystery rather than closing it off, and why wonder and awe are not optional for a living faith. They are the thing itself. Brian has been a pastor for over 4 decades. He's honest about where things went wrong in the charismatic world and what was worth keeping. And he's convinced that what the world needs is not a Christianity stripped of transcendence, but one that knows it's headed somewhere. So join us as we dive into Unseen Existences. Here is my conversation with Brian Zahnd. Brian, welcome to Shifting Culture. Welcome back. Thanks for joining me once again.
Thank you, Joshua. Good to be with you.
We're going to be talking about your book, Unseen Existences. You write about, and you talk about how modern people suffer a kind of spiritual homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that we feel homeless?
Well, I think it's all part of a whole, that whether we have actually consciously thought about philosophical materialism, that is, that the only thing that is real is the material world, that is pervasive within Western culture for the last, few hundred years. And so we're conditioned to think that way. But one of the many problems with philosophical materialism is it can't even account for matter. and so, to jump to my conclusion, our ultimate home is related to, we can use various language, but heaven is one term that's used. And if we sort of eliminate that possibility from the outset, then we are homeless. And we sense that, we feel that. I think a lot of people that cannot explain this in philosophical or theological language experience the reality of it.
I mean, you quote Nick Cave saying the rejection of the sacred is the root of our existential discontent. There's something of not seeing the sacred, something else, that we are discontented because of it.
I think that's profoundly true.
Yeah.
And what's interesting, unless people have a real commitment to either atheism or philosophical materialism, almost everyone agrees with my description of the problem. They sense that. We are aware that something has happened, and whereas we appreciate all that empirical-based science can give us, I mean, here we are, here in Canada, I believe, I'm here in Missouri in the U.S., and we're having a conversation, and that's the result of that sort of thing. In the end, it can't really give an account of why we're here and who we really are, and people sense that kind of discontent.
We need to try and figure out who we are. And one of the things is, you quote Pope Benedict said that humans are beings en route. You talk about pilgrimage a lot here and here in this book as well. So we have a culture obsessed with self actualization. Like,
Uh-huh.
I'm obsessed with my authentic self. So how radical is it? What is it? You're not yet who you're meant to be. We're not quite home, but we're headed towards home.
The opening sentence, at least of the first chapter, is we're all born a long way from home, which of course is a kind of odd sentence because we assume that home is where we're born. I understand that, but in a more profound Christian theological sense, home is a place we've not yet been, but we somehow yearn for.
An old distortion, I think previously we really were like, hey, Christianity is about going to heaven when you die.
Amen. Right.
No really spot here, and it doesn't really impact us much on earth. Are we still living with that now, or is there a different distortion that's happening that
I think in some circles, and this is who I'm really trying to address, there's been an overcorrection that we need to be aware of. And so, depending on where you grew up, if you grew up in some kind of Christian faith, there was a lot, I know I did, where it was all about afterlife. So post-mortem afterlife, that's what salvation is, hopefully heaven, not hell, that sort of thing. And then a lot of us along the way got that corrected, and we needed an earthy faith, one that was not disconnected from this good earth, that we are this synthesis of the dust of the earth and the breath of God. And we want something that's here and that's concerned about this life and is not merely escapist. But that can be pushed too far. I'm sympathetic. I had to go on that journey myself. I had to make those theological corrections and did that probably 25 years ago. But if we're not careful, and I've seen this happen, we can become almost embarrassed to talk seriously about heaven, especially if we're in the company of Christianity's cultured despisers. We feel like we have to appeal to them on some sort of social or political level to have validity. But Christianity without transcendence, it just merely degenerates into nothing but politics. And so, whereas in this book, I think I faithfully eschew escapist kind of heaven or the sentimental heaven. These are the memes you see of, the departed rock stars jamming together on a cloud, or and I don't traffic in the sensationalist. My 20 minutes in heaven. I'm not doing any of that sort of stuff. I'm really trying to recapture what is almost pervasive throughout the Scripture. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and I take that to mean more than the skies and the land. That there is this other dimension that is in fact more enduring, that is not temporal but eternal. I think we want to recover that if we can do it in a legitimate way.
it was the time when I moved to the Middle East, to Jordan, worked with Syrian refugees, and hearing a lot of people actually having real experiences with Jesus.
Yeah.
Transcendence. We have people that were having dreams of Jesus there that we were talking to, and he was encountering them in their dreams. There were all these spiritual experiences.
Yeah.
It felt like there was an overlap between the spiritual realm, the spiritual life, and the physical realm, which I didn't see in America growing up, and I haven't seen it moving back since as much. Why do you think it's particular to the American way that we forget about? Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening, and thank you for supporting the show. If you'd like to support the show and get early ad-free episodes, you go to Substack at shiftingculture.substack.com, and with your subscription, you could have a private podcast feed in your podcast app where you get to download early episodes before anybody gets to listen to them. You could also support the show by going to the support the show link at the bottom of the show notes in the app that you're using right now. That goes to a page that supports the work my wife and I do around the world. That donation is also tax deductible. So if you want a tax deductible donation, you could go there. Or if you want to support the show by leaving a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, that really helps new listeners find the show as well. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for your support. And thank you so much for supporting this work so that we could see the body of Christ look more like Jesus.
I think it's not so much just the American way as it is where Enlightenment empiricist thinking became a tyrant. So we're talking North America and Western Europe, where we're almost scolded if we don't just bow before, the idol of empiricism. If we talk seriously about, well, there is another world, well, then that's viewed as laughable, and we're embarrassed by that. I've just reached the point now where I'm long past being capable of being embarrassed by that. But I really do think that, if I haven't spent near the time in the Middle East that you have, but I've spent a lot of time in, for example, India, and these are places where the reality of the spiritual world is still presumed. And I think most Westerners do have more spiritual experiences than they usually either recognize, because then they'll say, well, it must be this and not a spiritual experience, or are comfortable to talk about. But what I have learned is if someone trusts you and they don't feel like they're being manipulated or you have some sort of agenda, but if they trust you and you ask them, have you ever had a spiritual experience? Almost everyone has and is willing to tell you about it, again, provided the conditions I described are right. But that's one-on-one conversation. The society itself, there's a pressure to view that as not credible.
Bridging these things together, one of the things you write about is if we don't take Jesus's humanity seriously, we end up with kitsch Christianity.
I think I'm quoting Hans Urs von Balthasar there, maybe.
Which is what? Sentimental, shallow, hollow.
Precious moments, figurines.
Exactly. So what is it about the humanity of Jesus, taking that seriously, that he's God incarnate, but he's also fully human, that helps us understand the world as it is?
It's the central mystery of the Christian faith. Of course, again, I keep coming back to this. In the world of empiricism and scientism, I'm for science, but scientism, that is where science becomes a religion and it's the only lens through which we can view reality. So that mystery is not viewed as necessarily a problem to be solved. That's what empiricism is going to say, and it's going to be resentful of mystery. Within the realm of Christian theology, we say, well, no, we are encountering the divine, the ineffable. And I think the clearest doorway into this mystery is a serious meditation on the Incarnation. And this is what has driven the most important aspects of Christian theology from the beginning, that Jesus Christ is fully God and he's fully human. He wasn't a human that was elevated to deity and is maybe just almost there. No, he's in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, but then the Word also became one of us. Not pretending. Christ is not dressing up for Halloween as a human being. He is as human as you and me, but he's also fully divine. And to me, that has just been an endless, I'll use the word mystery, that has been very edifying to try to hold those things together. There's an error on either side. Of course, to make Christ less than divine, we can't do that. I think most Christians know that. Maybe not. Maybe in the more progressive liberal area, that's maybe the mistake they're going to make, is to not really take seriously the divinity, the full deity of Christ. But among a lot of conservatives or people with any kind of evangelical background, it's the humanity of Jesus that gets diminished. And so you just kind of imagine Jesus, flying all over the place, just being God. And then what about, he sits weary at the well of Sychar and is thirsty. Was that just an act? No. He knows what it's like to walk a long ways and be real tired and say, "I gotta sit down and I need a drink." He experienced that as well. And, I mean, we can just go on and on and on about that, but I don't wanna simply reduce the mystery of the Incarnation to a dogmatic Chalcedonian statement that we can memorize and check it off and say, "Okay, I know that." I think we just need to be drawn to it again and again and again.
Walking into that mystery brings me to something I've thought about, talked about as I've trained church planters and missionaries. We talk about some of the general commands of Jesus. We find what the early church was doing in Acts chapter 2, and we walk through verses 37 through 47, and we say, here is what the church is about, the early church was doing. And one of the things we usually skip over is the parts where they said that there were signs and wonders, that there was awe, there was wonder. We don't usually talk about that part, but in your book, there's a huge through line of wonder and awe, and that we need to recapture some of this wonder. What do you think we miss if we skip over the wonder of Christ and the wonder of this Christian life that we're living?
Yeah, we lose the mysterium tremendum. I talk about that from Rudolf Otto. He coined that term. It just simply means the mystery before which we even tremble. And he makes his point that you don't have a religious faith without that. You have maybe a set of ethics. You have, I don't know what you have. That is necessary for people to relate to on a level of faith. Okay, where this is very deep within me. I believe that in some way I am encountering the divine, the other, the holy, God. And if we lose sight of that, then, or if we lose the sensation of that, then we're trying to preserve, I'm going to keep it within the context of Christianity because that's what I am, Christian faith through just sort of dogged loyalty, just be dutiful. And I don't know if that's going to work, and I don't want it to work that way. Now, there is clearly, I mean, I come from a charismatic background, and, Jesus movement, and then that just kind of automatically funnels into the charismatic movement, which I describe as good until it wasn't. It got really distorted with celebrity, especially with the interest in money, and then a little later, its involvement in politics, and it's all mostly a disaster these days as far as I'm concerned. But I also realized that, at least in those early days, there was something very real there that was transforming lives, where people who maybe had gone to church out of habit, out of, this is what my family does, suddenly were coming to life. And their life in a very real way was engaging with the reality of God. And those are the kind of things that we had to find ways to hold on to. I know there's hucksters out there, and that kind of desire can be manipulated, but that's nothing new either. That's been around also from the very beginning. And so we have to navigate all of that, but to just say, well, there's the possibility of, just strangeness for the sake of being strange, or there's hucksters out there, or there's charlatans out there, and say, so I'm not going to even be open to anything supernatural, miraculous. Well, that's a terrible sacrifice to make, and you'll end up with a Christianity that is unrecognizable to what you find in the New Testament, because the Bible, the whole of the Bible just presumes what we might call mystical experiences as normative. I mean, think about, there isn't anyone that I can think of in the Bible that has any significant biographical story given. I mean, if they give any amount of their story, at some point, I don't know, there's a burning bush, there's an angel, there's a light from heaven, there's, someone's healed. This is, if we're going to read the scripture seriously, these things are kind of expected to happen. And so I'm trying to help people get over their embarrassment or their previous bad experiences and say, no, don't sacrifice that. Don't let go of that.
How did you, even in your own life, hold it open for these experiences, hold your hands open, saying, I'm ready to receive and I could see this, but I could also then discern false
Yeah.
selves, discern false spirits. Like, what did that look like?
In my own story, I began to be, like I said, I gave you a very, very quick summary. Jesus movement in my teens that funnels me into the charismatic movement. Fine. Midlife, it wasn't fine. I began to just sense that the Christianity I knew was too compromised, too consumerist, too American. And I began to look for something else. But I really returned to just reading the church fathers, or not returned, because I began reading the church fathers, and that helped me. And I remember I started that about 2000 when I was about 40. And then in 2004, there was a real break, and I preached a sermon on a Sunday morning in August of 2004, and I said, I am packing my bags from the charismatic movement and moving on. Now, I did it with enough rhetorical flourish and skills of a preacher that it got a lot of applause, right? Now, they when I actually did it, it wasn't always as popular. But I always insisted what I said was, "I'm packing my bags," which means I'm taking some things with me. I just couldn't continue in the quote, "movement" itself. I just saw it as too compromised, too consumerist, too obsessed with money and politics and celebrity. And so I moved out of that movement, but I took some things in my bag, and I was not going to sacrifice my conviction that you can experience God, that you can hear God, that God answers prayer. And look, I know that God doesn't answer prayer the way we want an awful lot of the time. I get all of that. But I also hear people say these days, they've come out of that, I no longer believe in an interventionist God. Well, what good is a non-interventionist God? I, I don't need that God. That's functional atheism. Now, yes, I understand. I can't manipulate God. I can't control God. God is not some divine vending machine that I put in the right faith coins or whatever, and out pops my desire. I understand all of that. But the idea that God simply doesn't intervene in his own creation, that would seem to me cruel and callous. And so I'm holding on to these things that God does intervene, and there are times when there are miracles and there are mystical experiences. I wouldn't want to overemphasize that, and I don't think I do in the book, but I think it's an equally egregious mistake to just sacrifice all that and say, I don't believe in any of that anymore. I don't want people to do that.
For somebody that is young, maybe a child, where, I think we do start to believe in an interventionist God, especially in our prayer life. Like,
Mhm.
I'm going to pray, God's going to do what I ask. It's almost like Santa Claus, but it's not quite, How do you start to disciple young people into a place of saying, God acts, God moves, God's amazing. Sometimes he doesn't answer the prayers the way that we want.
Right.
Like, what does that
Well,
discipleship process look like for
you
people?
know, I teach a thing called prayer school. I've done it 104 times. It's 4.5 hours long. So I've done it a lot. And the most important thing I say in prayer school is the primary purpose of prayer is not to get God to do what we think God ought to do, but to be properly formed. And so prayer is not a means of manipulating omnipotence to our own benefit. The primary purpose of prayer is to bring our own soul into the acknowledged presence of God, that we might be in the process of becoming the kind of people we are intended to be. Spiritual formation. That's the primary purpose. And so if we keep that in mind, then we have a fundamentally healthy relationship with prayer. But I also say a subset of prayer is petition and intercession, where, I can't stop if not if, when there's always people I love that are struggling with illness. I am just not going to pray for them to be made well. Now, look, I mean, I'm a pastor of 44 years. I understand. Young person gets cancer and dies, and I do the funeral, and we prayed and prayed and prayed. I understand all of that. But I think the Lord can help us bear those kind of disappointments. What I think would be really damaging, though, is to simply say, I'm never gonna ask God to help or to heal somebody because I don't believe in an interventionist God. I that would seem to be a terrible poverty. So, and you know what? Sometimes there is the miracle of healing. I've seen that too. So,
Yeah. I've seen it both.
yeah.
I just watched A Hidden Life
I we can talk the next hour on the hidden life if you like.
by Terrence Malick. But so when Franz Jagerstatter was there and he was able to say no to give the oath to Hitler, to stand up to say, Jesus actually would probably want me to move a different direction. There was an actual outward, like walking out his faith. And he
Mhm.
stood up with incredible pressure from people just to say, just say it. It doesn't matter. You don't have to mean it.
Right.
You'll save your life. You'll save your family. Everything will be okay if you just say it. He couldn't do it. Do you think that there was that the hope in an unseen world, the hope in heaven that was started to enable him to be formed into Christ-likeness and to walk the journey he was able to walk? What was helping form him?
I know this story very well. In fact, I had a conversation with the Catholic priest who was the advisor to Terrence Malick because he knows the family. He knew his wife, he knows his daughters, and has known them for decades. And Franz Jagerstatter, he was the local tough. He was the leather jacket motorcycle riding hoodlum who, as he neared the age of 30, had just a dramatic sudden conversion, religious awakening. These things happen, and they're almost inexplicable, and you try to understand why such a thing would happen, but it happened to him, and I it just transformed him, and he was very committed to his church. He loved the scriptures. Everybody knew that he'd been transformed. And his martyrdom, and this is what it was, when he was, I don't think he was 40. I can't remember the exact age now. He wasn't yet 40. And in the immediacy of the moment, some bystanders would look at this as a terrible tragedy. Why didn't he just, okay, I don't believe in this, but it's just a piece of paper. I'll sign it and I can go on and live to be 80 years old and see my grandchildren and not place a burden on my wife and children. Well, there is the reality of a certain telos for certain lives. And Franz Jagerstatter was privileged to be called to be a martyr for the faith, which, by the way, Joshua, this is a concept that has been lost in so much of Western Christianity. We see if someone would be killed for being a Christian, we see it as nothing but a terrible tragedy that probably needs to be avenged. This was not the way the early Christians thought. I mean, at some point, some of the bishops had to say, "Hey, don't go looking for martyrdom. Don't just go provoke the Roman Empire." And I can tell you that Franz Jagerstatter, his wife and their daughters, they were fine, and they were proud of their husband, their father. They were there when he was beatified. He's on his way to becoming in the Catholic Church. I mean, that's not my world, but he's on his way to being Saint Jagerstatter. And the idea, I don't know that you have the courage to go to martyrdom, when all you have to do is say something and then you don't have to, if you don't have a strong conviction of this world is penultimate. I'm heading for another world. There is another world where my true is my true home, and it seems as though it's the will of the Lord that I enter into that other world through the door of martyrdom, which historically in the early church was celebrated, not lamented. Now, I mean, good. Again, I understand there's the sorrow and the pain. I don't want to belittle that, but from a greater distance with a wider angle lens, we say, we esteem these martyrs, and I do think there is a connection. But if if our faith is purely, almost entirely this world, then it does get a bit hard not to see something like martyrdom as nothing but a tragedy. They died too young, too soon. Did Jesus die too soon?
Yeah. Jesus did die too soon. And I mean,
Just think what he could have done.
that's the question there. I think with my question with Franz Jagerstatter is like, okay, he has this eschatological hope and a hope in a new world, right? That there is a different world that he belongs to, that he can go into. And we may not need to go with his story anymore, but
Sorry, I get excited about that.
no, I would love to talk about A Hidden Life the whole time.
Everybody
So
see the movie A Hidden Life. If you haven't, see A Hidden Life.
It's absolutely amazing, incredible. How do we bridge this gap in this reality that what we're seeing on this earth, in this world, is not ultimate reality? Like there is something like if our veil is lifted, we could actually see what is ultimate reality.
Yeah.
What exactly is an American evangelical? Where did the movement come from? And how did it become one of the most powerful forces in American life?
Hi, I'm Dan Hummel. I'm a historian of evangelicals, foreign policy, theology, and related topics.
I'm John Fia. I have written about American evangelicalism in 3 centuries over the course of 6 books, 18th, 19th, and 20th.
I'm Maggie Capra. I'm a teacher, researcher, and I consider myself a forever student of American evangelicalism.
This is the history that shaped a movement and a nation. American Evangelicals, a history podcast.
Again, this is a shift that has occurred in our thinking culturally. This was presumed by the Greek philosophers and by the church fathers and by all the early Christians well into the medieval period, that it is not the heavenly realm or the spiritual realm or the other realm, whatever you want to call it, that is ephemeral, that is fleeting, that is insubstantial. It's the reverse. And Paul says it like explicitly. He says, we look at things not that are seen, but are unseen. For that which is seen is temporal. It's subject to time, subject to change. Ultimately, it fades away. All things are passing away. We look at the things which are unseen because they are eternal. They are unchanging. And so, Plato arrived at this in a pre-Christian sort of way. Most of the church fathers worked with that idea and were on board with it and would sometimes refer to Plato as a proto-Christian. Certainly this is the way Paul thought about it, all the way into really the late medieval period. And then there began to be a shift. And it became because we became so fascinated with our ability to study through scientific method this world, which is fine. I'm not against any of that. Unless we make the mistake of forgetting that behind the material world is something more real. You see this I don't know if anybody's read The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis, which I love this little fantasy novel about a group of people really from hell, the great town, who are allowed to take a bus trip to heaven. And, some choose to stay, some don't, but that's not what I'm emphasizing here. That when they got there, they were like ghosts, and they the grass hurt their feet. Somebody tries to pick a flower and their hands are scraped raw. And this world is not the enduring, I don't know what word to use, real world. It's the world to come. And what I'm saying here is not anything other than good, solid, orthodox Christianity.
I want to say it maybe in another way, and that I have a fascination with time. And I think we just talked about this world there is temporal, right? We're time bound. We are consumed here with time, and it's going to go away at some point. And then this unseen realm is eternal. It's like timeless. There's outside of time. Is there a way to live here and now between the time bound and the timeless, the temporal and the eternal? How do we merge those or live like as the now and not yet of humanity?
In the book, I talk about Jesus and the raising of Lazarus, which for those that are paying attention to such things, that's the gospel reading for this coming Sunday. There's that strange part about Jesus wept. He's on his way to raise the man from the dead. He says so. I'm going to awaken Lazarus. I don't know how much time elapses between when he meets Martha and Mary and then they're rolling back the stone and he's saying, Lazarus, come forth. I play around with it. I say, let's say there's 30 minutes. Jesus doesn't say to Martha and Mary, oh, don't worry. Stop crying. I'm going to raise your brother from the dead. No, he doesn't. In those 30 minutes, and I say 30 minutes because of the verse in Revelation, there was silence in heaven for about 30 minutes. In that present moment, even Jesus knowing what he's going to do, he doesn't rush ahead. He stays right there in that moment. And in that moment, there is great grief and sorrow, and Jesus is going to share it with him, even to the point of his own tears. But he's also sustained by, I know what I'm about to do. Lazarus, come forth. Well, now we extrapolate that out on a much bigger level. And Christ can be with us in our moment of grief and sorrow at the loss of a loved one, but also knowing that he is the resurrection and the life. I have become convinced through the influence of Gerhard Lofink, Hans Urs von Balthasar, Douglas Campbell, that resurrection for those that die occurs at the moment of death. That we all enter the doorway of death at vastly different times. Thousands of years ago or indeterminate in the future, others will go through that door. But we all emerge at the same time. And there's been no one's been waiting. This gets rid of the idea of we need some sort of, well, are they just disembodied spirits for a long time? Or is there soul sleep? Or what are they doing in the meantime? No, we arrive at the door in this world, in this thing called time, at radically different moments. But we all enter the same moment. And since Einstein, we understand, this actually can work. We've thought of time as, it's hard not to think of time as this constant tick, tock, tick. It's all the same. It's not the same. We understand now that it is relative. And you get up to the speed of light and it's, as you said, time is no more. These are things to ponder, aren't they?
They are. It's a mystery and it's wonder for me. And that brings us back into wonder. One of the conceits here in your book is wonder is the way back into this.
It's a signpost. Yeah,
it's a signpost to get us there. And I love what you do. You contrast curiosity and wonder. The curiosity being information seeking, and wonder being soul awakening.
Yeah,
I've often thought curiosity is good. But what can wonder do that curiosity
Mm.
can't do?
I don't know how to describe it other than I think that wonder, it resides in a different place in our being. Curiosity seems to say just right there in our mind, in our head, and once we get the answer, we're kinda done. Wonder remains this attraction. We want to continue to experience this thing that induces wonder within us. And I think what we are seeing is some aspect of God in creation or simply in his very person. That's why I call wonder a reliable waymarker. That if we'll pay attention to it, not rush past it, not be so busy that we ignore it, that it will lead us toward the divine, toward God. I don't know what else to say.
Can you think of a time recently that you were stopped and you slowed down, you were able to pay
Yeah,
attention and brought into wonder?
I do this pretty regularly, and you can't see. I'm looking at my window here, and I talk about this in the book. I have this. I don't do it literally every night, but almost every night. I walk out into my backyard, and I observe. I listen. I watch, and there's always something happening. I mean, there's a whole world of drama just in my backyard with the crows have found something to talk about, clearly. I don't know what's going on, but they have some information. They have some news. Or at night, maybe it's the owls that I'll hear, or the way the stars look tonight, or the way the clouds look tonight, or it's a full moon, or there's no moon. I don't know. I am not trying to make myself do this, but regularly, like all the time, I spend 5 minutes at night in my backyard, and I will hear myself saying, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." I'm not taking anything for granted. I say, I am right in the midst of a miracle, and I'm at least awake enough to realize I am in the midst of a miracle. I mean, I'm sympathetic to protest atheists who have encountered profound injustice or have seen distortions of the faith where God is presented as something more like a ogre than a God of love. I understand all of that. And when I ask an atheist to explain to me, describe to me the God they don't believe in, which is an odd question, but you'd be surprised how accurately they can do it. Describe to me this God in which you do not believe. And I go, you know what? I don't believe in that God either, but I'm not an atheist. So I'm sympathetic to those that are have a moral objection to the concept of God that they've been given. And they're just, I see that as flawed, but as a moral quality that has some redeeming value. But as far as like just philosophical atheism, I don't know. I just want to say, we're here. I mean, come on, man. How do you explain it? And no matter what they say, and I've read the best, it's just kicking the can down the road. Well, I don't want to spend the rest of my life kicking the can down the road. I want to stop and say, God is the answer to the question, why is there something instead of nothing? And from what I can tell, this being, who is not a being within, in whom we have our being, in whom we live and move and have our being, is ineffable. I just want to say thank you for the invitation. That I have been called out of the dread abyss of non-being. Because this whole thing could be going on without me, right? The phenomenon of being does not require Brian Zahnd. But I got an invitation anyway. and despite, I know this journey through this life is toward another birth. And this journey is going to be painful, and there's going to be moments of great sorrow and loss and all of that. I acknowledge all of that. But I don't want to ever lose my gratitude that I got an invitation to the party. And I'm here. And I think about the world to come. Think about a baby in a womb. You got to play along with me here. It's kind of a thought experiment. They like it. Comfortable, warm. Ever so often, they may hear something that could cause them to, as it were, just play along, think, there might be another world. Ever so often I hear something out there somewhere. It's indistinct, but wonder what that is. It feels like this may not be all there is. And then one day something horrible happens, and the baby is expelled from this world, certainly is convinced that this is the end. This is the end. That's why they come into this world howling, because they're dying, and it's the end of the world they've known. It's the worst thing that could ever happen to them. And we say, happy birthday. Welcome to a whole new world. I really do think that our death is something like that. That we're going to go through this canal, and there'll be maybe sorrow or fear or pain or anxiety or whatever. And although I like to speculate about what this other world is like, I probably know as much about the world to come as the infinite world knows about this one, which ain't much. But at least I know it's there.
What would your hope be for the people who pick up this book and read it, Unseen Existences? But more than that, what would your hope be for people that actually their worldview is shifted and changed, and the spiritual realm and the physical realm are now interlocked again, are together again, and they're living out something different because they know that the spiritual world is all around them and it's here and now.
I think that new perspective allows for one of the things we need most in life, and that's hope. That this is not all there is. That there is something yet to come. And the other theme that we haven't talked quite as much about in the book is life as a pilgrimage. We touched on it briefly, but it kind of has a dual theme. One, there is this other world, the world of unseen existences, but we understand this life as a journey toward that. I mean, as the book begins, we're all born a long way from home. And if we can understand in the midst of the sorrows, in the midst of the trials and the challenges and the injustices, we're not home yet. We're on our way. And I don't mean that in an escapist way. I think people that know me well enough know that's not how I operate. But that's what prevents despair, is we're not done yet. This journey's not yet complete. But we hold to the hope that we're going to get there. And the idea that we're not alone, that the angels are with us. See, we don't talk too seriously about angels, but I think maybe we should. I talk a little bit. I think one of the most intriguing parts of the book, if I can talk about what intrigues me about my own book, is Sergius Bogolkov's understanding of guardian angels. I don't think I'm going to try to explain it here. I think it's people let them read it, but I put that in the book, not necessarily advocating for his position, but to help people think a little differently about the possibility of other worlds and other beings and what, so it was really just more, I put it in there as an example or a sample of one way of thinking, but I do find it intriguing that the guardian angel is our other self that we are journeying towards to unite with.
Yeah, that is very, very intriguing. Very intriguing indeed.
And if anybody wants to reject that, it's fine. I'm not sure that I believe it, but
yeah.
But I just present Sergius Bogolkov's. This is this great 20th century Orthodox theologian philosopher. I present his ideas on this, and they're really fascinating.
Yeah. It is fascinating to think about and to ponder and to wonder. I also think that what you said is something that our world needs right now. I think we're in a pit of despair
Yeah.
culturally, and that we need this hope, and this hope could point us to not just the journey and pilgrimage of finding our way home, but maybe finding our way towards one another
Yes.
again. And I
Yes.
think that could be very beneficial and helpful to just interact with people in this world again and find some hope in this pit of despair that we're in.
Right on.
So Brian, I'd love to get a recommendation or two from you. Is there anything you've been reading or watching or listening to that you could recommend?
I'm rereading a bunch of Wendell Berry. I've read Wendell Berry for decades now, but all of a sudden he seems more timely. And understand there's 3 Wendell Berrys. There's Wendell Berry the essayist, Wendell Berry the poet, and Wendell Berry the novelist. Start wherever you want. He's still with us. He's 91. I think he's still got another book coming out. God bless Wendell Berry. I think in the American moment we're in, we had 2 WB prophets, Walter Brueggemann and Wendell Berry. Brueggemann has stepped into the other world a year or so ago. Wendell Berry's still with us, but both of those voices seem more important now. I can read some of Wendell Berry's novels that were written 30 or 40 years ago. They're more relevant now, and I mean that in a prophetic sense. How to not be swallowed up by the machine, but to live fully human lives. There is an important book out. I don't know that I recommend it entirely. I don't agree with it all. Paul Kingsnorth's Against the Machine does a very good job of presenting the problem. I'm not so sure that he does as good a job with the answer, and I think it's really maybe too bleak. As an antidote to that, I would read Wendell Berry.
Yeah, as Paul Kingsnorth quotes Wendell Berry at the beginning of his
book.
Paul
Kingsnorth.
I think maybe that should be a portal into Wendell Berry. Against the Machine, the very first part of it, I was like, oh, this is going to be amazing. I can't wait to say what are the answers? Like, how are we going to live differently now, and what do we do?
So
it didn't land the plane for me, but
I'll let you in on a little something here. I'll let you on a little secret.
Yeah.
I don't give all the information, but now we're supposed to be talking about unseen existences of heaven, earth, and divine mystery and all things, and we have. But I'm always writing, and I had a editor say to me a couple of weeks ago, because he'd read something unpublished that I'm working on, and he said, "You need to write a book called Hope Beyond the Machine." And I thought for sure that he had read Against the Machine and says, "Okay, Brian, respond in a more hopeful way." He was unaware of this book.
Wow.
But it resonated in me. So that may in fact be what I do next.
That would be amazing. Be that. I need some hope. this age of the machine. So that's really good. Well, this book, Unseen Existences, will be available anywhere books are sold. So Brian, is there anywhere else you'd like to point people to? How could people connect with you?
I have an unusual name that is, as far as I know, I'm the only Brian Zahnd out there. So Google me, you'll find sermons on YouTube, and you'll find that I do occasionally something on Substack, and I'm active on Instagram and some other places. You'll also find all the trolls out there that'll say mean things about me, but just try to ignore them.
Ignore the trolls.
Find that's Brian Zahnd. I ignore them.
Yes, please ignore them. They don't matter in the end, because we're all on this pilgrimage to find our way home, and we're on this journey together. So let's journey together. Let's be on this pilgrimage. It was a fantastic conversation. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for this conversation. It was great.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Shifting Culture. This show was edited and produced by me, Joshua Johnson, at Shifting Culture Productions. If you're enjoying the conversations, consider supporting the work by subscribing at shiftingculture.substack.com. For as little as $5 a month, you'll get ad-free early access episodes and other exclusive content delivered straight to your inbox. I'd love for you to not just listen, but engage. Reach out, share what's resonating, and let's keep shaping culture together. Whether you're a listener with feedback, a creative with an idea, or a brand looking to connect with a thoughtful, engaged audience, let's talk. If you're interested in advertising on the show, I'd love to hear from you. Contact me directly for rates and availability. Until next time, let's keep shifting culture.